Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to episode 201 of the Reformed Gamers, the show all about theology, video games, and still surprised that we're over 200 episodes now. It's a new feeling, but I like the feeling. But dear listeners, thank you again for checking out this episode. I'm your host, Logan, and joining me on this episode, as you can see on the screen here, is Jon Harrison himself. You may know him from either Twitter or a TED Talk or his book, Mastering the Game, or maybe all three. But Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Right on. We are super excited that we are able to really just carve out some time to have you on the show. And I've been actually meaning to have you on the show. I actually was hoping to get you on the show earlier in the year, but then the way that the year was going on and certain things were happening, it didn't give me a chance to read your book until, later in the summer. And so it just kind of worked out. So maybe this is the opportune time to have you on. So either way, I'm just glad though that we're able to get you on and talk about your book and some other things as well.
Excellent.
But with that, some of our listeners may not be familiar with who you are. Maybe they don't follow you on Twitter, or maybe they haven't read your book. Would you mind taking just a few minutes to kind of let some of our listeners know kind of who you are, what you're about, and maybe a little bit about your book as well?
Yeah, sure. Certainly. Well, Jon Harrison, I go by Jon or Jonathan. So the Jon is short for Jonathan, which means I don't have the H there. Fun story. The reason how I got to be Jon, I never went by Jon my whole life. It was always Jonathan until I found out that jonathanharrison.com cost way more than I wanted to spend. So you got the secret scoop here now. That's where John D. Harrison came from because, economics. So
yeah, no, makes sense.
But so I guess the primary thing we're talking about is book and the idea behind it, which is what I've themed both some of my writings online, former podcasts, and really, if anyone knows me, these conversations just happen. What can we learn about life from video games?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. I mean, professionally, my role, I'm a director of learning and organizational development at a university. So my passion is helping people succeed, helping people tap into their innate talents, their God-given abilities and gifts, and make the most of those. And then it just so happens I have this little hobby on the side that I've been doing for more than 35 years, playing video games. And I said, what if the two of them could go hand in hand? And that's kind of the excuse I've been using to follow it through. And a few years later, I'm still doing it. Like you said, there's a TEDx talk on the topic. There's book number 1, book number 2 is in draft form, working through that. And I haven't run out of ideas, but I think that games have a lot to teach us about life, and maybe vice versa.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of us here at TRG would definitely agree with that as well. And that's really what drew me to your book in the first place, was how you were taking video games and then applying them to real world applications and seeing what we can learn. I'm like, dude, that's kind of what we do on the podcast, but with a little bit of a different spin. And so I'm like, I've got to read his book first before I get him on the show, though. And thankfully I did. And I highly recommend it. So dear listeners, I'll say it right now. I guess if you want a copy of the book, I might be giving out a couple copies. So just, there it is. I feel like I was going to say something else and I lost it, which means it probably wasn't too terribly important, or I'll just remember it at the end of the show when we're ending the show. But yeah, no. So again, awesome book. We'll get to that here in just a little bit on the show. Dear listeners, before we get into the show proper though, as always, a little bit of housekeeping with some things that you should be checking out. As always, be following our YouTube channel, be following our website as well, because there's new content going up there all the time. I want to say like every day, but not every day, but it goes up there frequently enough to where if you're subscribed to either one, you'll always get notifications of when new content's going up and you'll be able to enjoy that there. So in case you want TRG outside of the podcast format, there's plenty of stuff for you to check out as well. Also, another reminder is that any kind of links to like Jon's YouTube channel or TEDx Talk or anything like that, links to everything will be in your show notes. So if you want to check that out when you're done listening to the show, just open up your show notes. They're all right there. You can go check them out for yourself as well. So that way you have easy access to all of that stuff. But without further ado, let's get into the show like we always do with a little bit of what have we been playing. And Jon, what's a game that you've been enjoying lately?
So, narrowing it down to two. I've been trying to do a modern game and a retro game. Like you, like many others, I've got the perpetual backlog that I've been
Yeah,
kind of chipping away at.
it never ends.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And so up this week just started Metal Gear Solid 5.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's one I'd been putting off.
Oh,
I
is this your first
actually
time playing it?
This is my first. I have never touched. I went 1 through 4.
Oh, wow.
I jumped into our other friend Kojima's game, Death Stranding,
Yeah,
and then I
awesome
said,
game.
it's a fantastic game, but I think you have more to say about that. You already did.
A little bit. I said a lot about the
Yeah.
game.
So if the dear listeners haven't heard that yet, that's worth checking out. Death
Yeah.
Stranding is got some cool stuff. But yes, Metal Gear Solid 5, and then I'm also replaying Kirby's Adventure for the NES. I
Okay.
never really went all the way in on that. I never finished it. I played about halfway through and said, I need to go back. I need to revisit it. And I think it's a very good kind of counterbalance to kind of the grim darkness that I see over
Yeah.
in Metal Gear Solid 5. And I can just pull up Kirby and, kind of get in a better place mentally. So
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing at the moment. Because my big game before that was Ghost of Tsushima, and
Oh,
I
wow.
just dove headfirst into that. So
Yeah.
that's where I am at the moment.
Right on. So do you typically, because I know there's some people who, when they read a book, they typically read like a fiction book and a nonfiction book at the same time to balance the two out. Do you normally play a more modern game and a retro game at the same time to balance the two out?
I've tended that way. I don't know that I would say that I intentionally did it like that. It just seems
Yeah.
to be something that happens, especially with the accessibility and the pick up and play of a lot of our retro games compared to the sit down, invest yourself nature, especially of kind of these bigger epic AAA or modern platform games. So I think it's just,
Okay.
I think it's pragmatic, and it just so happens that's the way it looks.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a good way to do things. I think that's a good balance, especially with the game that you're playing with Metal Gear Solid 5, and like you mentioned how dark and gritty that game can be. What are your kind of initial thoughts of the game, and kind of where are you at in the game so far?
I finally reached the part where it becomes a little more open world, but
Okay.
the initial prologue piece, I just was, it's a bit much.
Yeah.
That's also, it just was weird. It's hard to describe what's going on. There was a lot happening there,
Yep.
a lot of kind of discomforting things occurring, both on a physical level and on a mental level.
Yep.
And in the way Kojima likes to do his storytelling, it kind of unfolds in a way that just when you think it couldn't get a little more bizarre or just worse off for you as a protagonist, it seems to find a way to do so.
Yep. I remember when that game came out, and it was fun to see kind of the people's reactions in our community, because for a lot of people this was their first Metal Gear game, and I was like, I don't know if you should start with
Ooh,
5. Like that seems like a
yeah,
bad idea, but you go
right.
for it, and then just seeing the
Mm.
range of responses, like it was awesome seeing the people who had never played one before react to it, and they're like, "What is this? Why do you people like these games?" I'm like, "It's Kojima, man. I can't explain it." But no, that is awesome. Well, very good then. I like that a lot. Switching up to kind of what I've been playing. I've been playing this game called Ender Lilies. I think
Hmm.
the subtitle is Quietus of the Night, I think is what it's called. Don't quote me on that. But this is kind of a Metroidvania, similar to. It makes me think of Hollow Knight a lot, just the way in the looks and the way that it plays and all that. It's just very Hollow Knight. So if anyone that's watching this or listening to this likes Hollow Knight, I'm pretty confident you'll like Ender Lilies. But the premise of the game is you wake up as this young girl who is like a priestess, and you're going through this region. I can't really. There's a castle, and there's like an underground crypt area, and there's a town, and but the main premise is you are going around and purifying spirits, and then some of those spirits that you purify actually become almost like your Pokemon, so to speak. And so you use like the knight you start off with. You can use him, and he's like your basic slash attack. And then you have a witch that does like the spell casting, and then you have this other rogue like character that swings a ball and chain around to kind of give you some breathing room when there's a bunch of enemies. And you can rotate all those out, and so you have a different like setup depending on how you have the spirits laid out in your order. And I think it's fun. It's definitely more gothic, kind of horror looking, so it's probably not for everyone's taste. But it's also how do I describe this? The cool thing about the game that's different than Hollow Knight seems to almost throw you into the difficulty parts pretty early on. This game eases you into it a little bit better to where you're like, okay, I can handle this. I'm doing okay. And then you basically hit a wall when you go to the crypt because that's when it's harder. There's spiders everywhere, and it's not bad, but it was doing good where it eased you into it, and then it just kind of pushed you off the cliff at that point. And I'm like, all right, well, fair enough. But it does make grinding out levels so much easier because on Hollow Knight, when you died, you lost all your currency. This one, you maintain all your experience and you just keep leveling up. So if dying is more of just a minor annoyance than it is anything else, and so it's made playing it a lot better. And so I just like the premise of it because the other thing with it too is the girl never actually attacks. It's always the spirits that come out and attack. So it's an interesting parallel to see how she's this priestess kind of pure character, but then you have these spirits coming in and doing all the fighting for her. So it's cool. I think thematically and artistically, it's really, really cool. The music's great. And like I said, if anyone that's listening to this has played Hollow Knight, I really think I'm pretty confident you'd really enjoy it. So it's a pretty cool game. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where it goes and how it finishes out because the lore of it is kind of that cryptic Dark Souls kind of hidden thing where you got to read all these different texts, and it's interesting to say the least. But it's definitely a healthy challenge versus something that makes Hollow Knight something that makes Hollow Knight not as accessible as the difficulty, but this one I think is more accessible because of how it does that. But yeah, cool game. I'm enjoying it. I'm pleasantly surprised by it. I didn't think it would be as good as it is, but thankfully it is. Well, yeah.
See, this is my concern. Every time I speak to someone, my backlog is going to get bigger because I love Metroidvanias. I thought
Yeah.
Hollow Knight was great. I loved Bloodstained. Castlevania Symphony of Night's one of my all-time favorites. So I think I just ended up with another item on the backlog here.
I was about to say, I apologize in advance for when you inevitably purchase this game within the next few hours.
Maybe I already have.
Yeah, oh, fair enough. You know, what's funny, I saw that you had joined the Discord a little bit earlier today, and I was sitting there going like, I hope he doesn't have a backlog because whenever people come into TRG, they get all these game recommendations and their backlog just grows. And we talked about it in several episodes because I think Adam, when he joined in, he was like, I've got to play all these games now because I'm missing out on so much. So that's a hazard when you join the community.
It sure is, but I collect retro games. I don't have like the wall of retro bragging rights. I've got a plastic tub in the garage, but I've got so much. It's embarrassing.
Yep. Yeah, I understand. I'm right there with you. I'm still working on my tub of retro games. I just have a small little meager shelf in my office, but yeah, I'm trying to shift my thinking from backlog to library and just trying to think like that's a little bit easier to kind of digest and look at and not have as much shame over because it's like it's a library. I'll get to them eventually, but
no,
at the
I
same
really
time,
like that library because if you speak to a librarian, they have not read every book in their library.
yeah,
they know where to find it. They know where it is. They can tell you about it, but that doesn't mean that they've gone through it. Yeah. So I like that. I'm gonna borrow that and apply that mentality.
Sounds good. Like I said, that's what I've been trying to do. It makes playing through my game library a little bit better because I'm like, okay, it's not a backlog, it's a library. It's okay. I can't remember someone mentioned it to me on Twitter, and I was like, that's big brain thinking. That's a pro gamer move. But yeah. Speaking of pro gamer moves, I mean, you've written a book about gaming and how to use that for like not even just life but business as well. And kind of before we get into it, just a quick reminder to our listeners to leave a rating and review for the show on your favorite podcast app of choice, or if you're watching this on YouTube later on, leave a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, the typical YouTube spiel, do that there. But let's get into the topic a little bit because John, I wanted to have you on because like I said, I picked up your book and I didn't want to have you on the show without reading the book first because that would just, I feel like I wouldn't have any questions. I'd be like, but now that after I've read it, I was like, dude, I really need to have John on the show because this is so in line with what we do here on the show. Whereas we're focused more specifically on like worldviews, themes, theology type stuff, but you're still doing the same thing, but you're applying it into the real world, business, success, just being an overall efficient and effective person. So with that in mind, let me kind of go with this here because I mean I have it written down, and if I don't read it off my notes, then well, listeners know it'll be a words are hard moment. So something that kind of stood out to me when I was reading your book, you had a chapter on innovation that really just kind of really resonated with me and this podcast and kind of what I tend to, or where my train of thoughts tend to go when I play games. And something you mentioned in the chapter was about your own experience of combining video games with life lessons and leadership. So that ties into your book, which leads me to ask you this question. Where did the idea for mastering the game come from exactly?
Oh, that's a really good question. It didn't exist until a couple of years back. So, like many people, got into the work world, living life, trying to advance your career, and you
Yeah.
study and you figure out whatever your niche is and where you're going to go with that. And so I was looking for a little more of that ability to be artistic, to contribute, to do something of my own design,
Hmm.
that creative urge inside that I think a lot of us have. And I started doing a blog because that was what we did back in the day.
Yeah.
And so I started a blog, did the whole WordPress thing. I started doing the leadership development because that was closely aligned to the work that I do. I work in organizational development, which is really taking behavior psychology and applying it to the workplace and helping people be more effective. And I said, let me write about what I know. So I would write these posts, and then a new leadership book would come out. John Maxwell would come out with a book, and and
Yeah.
and then everyone else the next week would be doing a review. And so you'd have all these reviews pop up online, people writing about the book and giving their summary. And I realized, I don't want to keep doing the same thing that everyone else
Hmm.
is doing, because there were people who were doing it better. There were people who had more time, or whatever the thought was. It's like I didn't want to do the same thing. And I started doing this kind of fun thing on Fridays where I just had like a free for all Friday where I talked about something on my mind. And once or twice, I said, let me do
Okay.
something about a video game. Let me talk about
Yeah.
that. And it felt good. It felt fun and it felt inspiring. And so I sat down at my kitchen table in the condo. I remember saying this moment. I was getting up at 5 a.m., before work, trying to put in my 2 hours of writing. And and I sat down and I said, okay, what can I do that's unique? What are my hobbies? What are the things that I could write about like the rest of my life and not get sick of it? And so I
Yeah.
started writing down a few things. I wrote down, I had the work side. I had cars. I like cars a lot. So I wrote that down, but more of a fan, not like a full on enthusiast. I'm like, okay, maybe
Okay.
not. I wrote about books. I wrote down my faith. I wrote down, all these other things. And so video games and business kind of like popped to the top. And again,
Hmm.
bunch of business websites, bunch of leadership websites, bunch of video game websites. I didn't want to do the same old. Like, what if I did these same things on the same site? Like, well, that's kind of
Ah,
weird. That's like whiplash. Like,
yeah.
Friday we're going to talk about, how do you manage your time effectively? And then on Monday we're going to start out by talking about the latest Advance Wars game on the Game Boy Advance. Seemed kind of
That's
weird.
that's cool though. Like I love that because it stands out in a really unique way, and not like a unique weird way, but like in a way that's like an intriguing way, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and so I was thinking that maybe that was the route I would go, right? And then I
Hmm.
realized, like, but who's it for? I mean, it's for
Ah, yeah.
me. It's for me. But what if I pushed it a little further and I said, what if I wrote about both topics in the same post? What if
Ah.
every post was the same thing? And so I decided just to say, okay, if I did this, if I went all in on this, what would be 5 blog post articles that I could write about? And so I started writing down some of these different ideas, like,
Hmm.
how Metroid can help you succeed at work, and how to manage your time like a speed runner. And like I started coming up with all these like wacky things, and I filled a page full of like all these ideas for post titles, just concepts. And when I hit like 30 of these, I said, okay, it looks like I'm gonna have to do this. And so that's where classicallytrained.net came from. So it's classically trained. It's borrowing on, kind of that retro game T-shirt design that
Ah,
some people have seen.
okay.
But it was
And sorry,
classic video games. Yeah.
this was a website that you had started then, was a
Yes.
classically trained one? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So classicallytrained.net was where I went with that for a while. And then I dipped my toe into podcasting and started doing the classically trained podcast. And I would first do the verbal versions. I would just read the pod posts that I wrote, just have a podcast. But then I
Okay.
started saying, well, what if I interviewed people? And the first interview I got, Simon Sinek. He's a business writer. He wrote Start With Why. He wrote Leaders Eat Last.
Okay, that's why I've heard of the name. Yeah.
He's got a TED Talk, has like 30 million views on it. He's got all this. I decided to reach out to him and said, can I interview you for this podcast? And they said, yeah. At that time, it was just a business idea. And so without telling him, I pivoted to saying, okay, Simon, you wrote this great book. Tell me a little bit more about it. And then I moved on and say, okay, now what have you learned about business and life from a video game?
How did he respond to that?
He had a great answer. Well, I knew by internet stalking him that he had just given a keynote at Nintendo headquarters.
Wow. Okay.
And I saw that he was there and he talked about Nintendo. And so I said, okay, this is my foot in the door. I was like nervous.
Yeah.
I'm like, my voice is like shaking. I can't believe I'm going to ask him this. I finally get this guy to talk to, one of my, writing heroes, someone I liked. And I'm going to ask him something out of left field without warning him. And he answered it. He said, one of the things I noticed is that when I'm trying to defeat a game, when I'm trying to go down a path and I keep losing, I think, why don't I just try something out of left field, try something different? And sometimes it works.
Okay. Yeah.
And he says that life is like that. Sometimes you'll be, at work, you'll be in your business, you'll be in your life, your school, whatever. You kind of hit this wall and you keep doing the same thing. And sometimes you just need to step back and just try something new, try something different, a different approach. Yeah. And sometimes it works.
Yeah.
A lot of times it doesn't, but you learn. Yeah,
exactly.
So
that's some XP from that.
You get some XP, some serious XP. Hopefully not the game over screen. So
yeah.
And that's kind of the birth of the podcast, which eventually led to a book because I had enough writing on the website that I said, well, what if I kind of pulled this all off the website and expanded on it and fleshed it out and made it meaty and arranged it by skills, by different skills. As you mentioned, the one chapter, we have one on innovation, got one on personal accountability. We've got one on, various types of productivity topics. And so I kind of put the stories and the games together in a way that made sense. And I wove it into a book. And over the course of a year, all my blog posts gave me enough fuel and ideas to put it together in it's 310 pages. It's not a booklet. It's a full book. It was a lot of work, but I wanted to put things out there that could help others.
Yeah. And that's cool. I really think that a lot of stuff that you have in your book does help. It even got me to think through some different things too, specifically like the difficulty thing. I think I remember now you bringing up this Simon Sinek thing and his quote. And I'm like, man, maybe that's why I like playing like games like Sekiro, Dark Souls and stuff, specifically when I'm going through a really difficult time. Like I remember when I was playing Sekiro and, this was right when I was about to transition into being a teacher. And I was just kind of being hard on myself, unsure of the unknown. Like, what am I going to do? And I sat there and I was like, well, no, wait a minute. I'm playing this Sekiro game. I don't know what the boss is going to do when I go fight him. I don't know what his moveset's going to be, but I love the thrill of figuring it out like a puzzle and learning it. Why don't I take that same approach to this new job? It's kind of the similar concept. I don't know what it's going to be. And if I take that kind of mindset into it, I'll figure it out. And now here I am a month and a half in, a little over a month in. And I'm like, I love this. This is awesome. And if I would have not had that same approach, I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd probably be pulling my hair out and freaking out and crying every day in the bathroom or something. But, so kind of with that, I'm sure taking on writing a book is probably intimidating because this was your first book, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So how did you approach that? Was there a level of anxiety involved that you had to fight through, or how did you really tackle writing a book?
It's the same way you eat an elephant or you complete Skyrim, right?
Okay.
It's one bite at a time.
Yeah.
You get out there, you grind, you do one side quest, you write a certain number of words a day, and if you show up and you do that consistently over time, you'll have something of value there. And there was a lot of revision. There was a lot of going back, and and that's okay. The beautiful thing is it all happened behind the scenes. What I liked is it was private because I'm doing this. No one's watching me. I self-published. I didn't have someone over my shoulder with deadlines.
Yeah.
So I had the freedom in the room to kind of let it develop. And, even in the process of writing a second book right now, I've gone back and I scrapped the entire thing. I got rid of about 30,000 words and just started from scratch because I wanted to
Oh,
take it a
wow.
different direction. So there's a certain freedom in that, but it
Hmm.
definitely is about consistency and discipline and showing up.
Yeah. I would agree with that too. I mean, that's kind of been our core thing here with even just the podcast is just maintaining that consistency, staying hard at it, or not saying hard at it, but saying working hard at it. And even just being okay with the fact that, because I think for a lot of people, and we can get into this a little bit, I think a lot of people don't go into certain things or certain ventures or just aspects of life because of that unknown thing, and maybe they're afraid of failing or making a mistake. Whereas, you said that you would scrap 30,000 words and start over, which is uh, that just thinking about that like stresses me out. I'm not even writing a book, but I think even with the podcast, we've had to come to a point where it's like, we're going to do our best with an episode. It may not be our best, but we're going to put it out there and see what people think. And oftentimes it's a lot of people's favorite episodes, and it is what it is. So with that, well, kind of speaking of that, because I mean, you're in leadership and you're helping people try to get their most or get their best potential out there and maximize that. What do you think? Why do you think it's hard for people to go into the unknown and embrace failure, so to speak?
Frankly, I think it's we myself included. When I say we, it's always the royal we. This is me,
Right. Right.
and this is my experience I can talk about. Um, I think that many of us have that level of comfort with what things are, right? And there's
Hmm.
comfort in where things are, the known. And that's part of why I feel that often God pushes us outside of that, because that's where our growth happens. Our growth happens beyond what we've done already, beyond what's safe and behind us.
Yeah.
Um, you know, being mediocre, being average isn't something that we're called to do, and it's something that I think can be very normal if we're not cautious. We can get tied up into, even as someone who creates content, right? It's easier to consume than to create.
Yeah.
It's easy just to, I'm going to play another game, I'm going to watch another movie, I'm going to read another book, just one more. If you want to create, do it. Put something out there, and you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect, because
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it. When we show up and we put ourselves into things and give it our all, give it our best, it can change others' lives, even being imperfect, especially in many times being imperfect.
Yeah. Definitely. That's the thing that even because I mean, some people will reach out and ask, like, hey, how do I start a podcast? And I'm like, just understand that your first handful of episodes probably are not going to be that great, and that's okay. Don't let that stop you from doing stuff. There's one podcast that's still putting stuff out now, and they're even streaming and doing all that. Co-op Trio podcast. So shout out to you guys. They reached out to me like, how do I start this? How do I do this? Blah blah. And I kind of encourage them a little bit. And now, because of the consistency thing that you talked about, they embraced maybe rolling with the punches or not doing so good on some things, and they're doing a great job now because of that. But it's that thing of, yeah, no, I just agree that I think there's that fear there. But I guess so with that, then, tying it back into your book, what are some video game principles that you would use to overcome that fear?
Well, again, see every failure as a learning opportunity,
Yeah.
right? And learn from others too. Learn from their mistakes. That's the beauty of biographies. That's the beauty of,
Yeah.
as we talk about faith, we got a whole book full of examples of failures in humanity
Yeah.
that we can learn from, and we don't have to make those same mistakes. We've got the wisdom of people around us. When you play a video game and you hit a wall and you can't defeat a boss, or you get stuck on a stage or a puzzle, you can do a couple things. You can beat your head against it. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that wins. Those of us who grew
Yeah.
up in the 80s know all about just grinding against things that were painful.
Yeah.
But once the internet came out, you can go an online FAQ. And, if you're so inclined, you can look up the answers and solve these things and
Yeah.
not get stuck there. Well, we have that in life. We have people that have been there before. We see people going
Hmm.
online to YouTube and watch maybe a video tutorial walkthrough. Same thing. There are people that have had these experiences that have gone before us that if we stop and listen, we can learn a lot.
Yeah.
from those failures, from those mistakes. And the other thing is the fear never goes away. We can just channel it into excitement. That's courage is not the opposite of fear. It's taking action in spite of that fear. And
Yeah.
it doesn't, just because, oh, no, I'm going to be courageous. Well, I feel afraid. Well, you're still courageous if you're taking action.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring that up, and kind of just sitting there listening to you talk about it. It reminded me of how, for some odd reason, like the parable of the talents has come up a couple of times in like just my own personal readings, and how, you'd have these three workers who would go out and invest or try to find some way to take what their master had given them and then grow it. But then there was the one who hid it. And I've always just read that as just like, oh, this guy didn't do what he was supposed to do. But I've read so many times now here lately that, you know, kind of what you're saying is that you can still have fear, but you can channel that into doing something and then seeing what comes of it. Whereas if you let it consume you, then you don't really do anything with what God's given you. And so I really like that, because it's speaking personally in my own life, some of the things I've been reading, but I've been reading on my own. Words are hard, but then, it also, I'm sure it's speaking to some people now who maybe are nervous to try something else out or try some new venture, or even start a podcast. And maybe that's something that God has gifted them with, but if they won't know if they won't ever try it.
Let me admonish everyone on this, and I'm speaking to myself again here, because this is one of those ideas that's been on the cutting room floor, and I haven't figured out what to do with it yet. I think I know now. I'm going to call it one life, no continues, and this goes back to the idea of being in an arcade. Where those games you
Yeah.
put your quarter in, you put your token. It's not a quarter anymore. I'm just dating myself now. It's like $3 to play an arcade game if you go to those like card swipe places. But anyways, you've got like your one life left. What do you do? How do you play the game?
Yeah.
You're not just gonna play it safe completely. You got to go for it at that point. If you make a mistake, yes, it's not great. However, you can't play it safe. You got to go all in at that point. And so, life is the same way. We got one shot at it. We got to make the most of what we have and
Yeah.
the opportunities we're presented with. That includes our talents, our abilities, our skills, and make sure we're channeling it to the right thing and spending it in the right way. And it's never too late to get that back on track. Even if you don't think
Yeah.
you're where you need to be, guess what? Now's a good time to start. Clean
Yeah.
break.
Absolutely. I love that. That's such a good mentality to have too, because when you have a mentality like that, like you can, it's weird to say you can do anything, but you kind of can, because it's like, it's not too late to start a podcast. It's not too late to start getting into YouTube. It's not too late to start, maybe studying the Bible more with your family, those kind of different things on a more lower kind of ground level sort of thing. But no, I like that a lot. Um, so with all that in mind, kind of just thinking through these things and just going for it. I mean, you obviously did that with your book, which started off, going from your interest, narrowing it down, or writing on your blog, then narrowing it down to a specific focus. And that led to a podcast, which led to your book. I'm curious, in between all of that, where did the TED Talk come in? How did that
Ah,
fit in?
that's a great question. That's another funny one. You want to talk about learning from failures? That's a good example. And so it was I want to say it was around November. We had a local TED Talk that was here in my city. I'm in Boca Raton, Florida,
Oh, okay.
and I saw it and I thought, oh wow, this will be so great. I've been writing on the blog. I've come up with this idea. I think I saw a challenge online actually. Now that I think of it, that said, if you had a TED Talk, what would it be about? I'm like, oh, well, that's easy. It'd be about, video games, those skills you learn in video games. You
Yeah.
can transfer those to real life. That's what, so I kind of wrote like a pseudo draft as if I was going to give one. And then I
Hmm.
saw that it was out there. I'm like, let me apply. And I got the thanks, but no thanks response
Okay.
from the organizers. And I'm like, okay, well then. And so here's how it all developed. I said, well then, if that's the case, I'm going to finish my book this year. And so I
Okay.
just that at that point, that's when I kind of just doubled down on getting it done. I finished it up that year. It was finished by December, the end of December that year. And then right around January, like 2 weeks after, I got a phone call from the event organizer says, yeah, one of the speakers didn't work out. Uh, we're going to need you to speak and you have 11 days to prepare.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I think, first of all, giving a talk on a stage in front of 500 to 600 people is going to be intimidating for a lot of people. Even
Yeah.
someone like me, who public speaking is part of what I do. I teach, I stand up in front of adults and talk at them, sometimes with them. um, it's intimidating. But then to only have 10 days, 11 days, and this was at 4 p.m. So that's when I'm like, yeah, no, I don't have 11 days.
Oh,
I've got
man.
10 days.
Yeah, that's a really short turnaround.
Yeah, but really writing the book helped crystallize my thinking and gave me some really great examples.
Okay.
And so I was able to put something together. It's easy to speak for half an hour. It's really hard to speak for 18 minutes or less. And
Yeah.
that was the format. They wanted you to be 18 minutes or less. And they actually told me, because of being in at the last minute, I could really only have about 12 minutes. And so
Oh,
I needed to
wow.
keep it tight. So was kind of thrust into it, didn't have time to do much else except write it up. And then you're saying it more or less from memory. It's kind of an extemporaneous slash memorized experience.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's how that happened. It was kind of all together at the same time.
Yeah. So how did you feel like after you gave it? Like, and what was kind of the response to your TED Talk?
There's that strange sense of surrealism that we have at those moments in our life where maybe
Yeah.
either something we've worked towards, or something that surprised us. The day you get married, or you have a child, or these moments that are forever in your memory. And there's that weird sense where you're after the fact, kind of like, did that just happen? And so it's kind of one of those, like, did that just happen? And thankfully it was one of those things that with preparation and work and just everything coming together, it went well.
Good.
you know um that it was just kind of, yeah, that was, I think, was kind of my initial response, was like, that really just happened. That's pretty awesome. That's great.
Yeah. And so after you'd finished it, did people like respond to you like, man, I had no idea video games could even like be like this? Or did you get people that, because I mean, you kind of run the risk of people really with anytime you post anything online or you do anything in front of people, there's going to be both the positive and the negative.
Right.
So I guess what were some of the different kinds of reactions you got, or thoughts, or things like that you got from people who had listened to it?
I was surprised. I received a lot of positive support, and in the places that I least expected it, I'd expected others who were, quote, gamers, to be like, "Oh yeah, yeah, this is cool, this is great." Um, but I heard from a lot of parents, actually, who
Huh.
said,
Okay.
"So tell me more about this. How do I, reach out to my teenager, or my son or my daughter, who are spending all this time with the games?" And it was interesting, because then there was kind of this assumption that I knew how many hours were appropriate to play, or which games were right for kids. And so
Yeah.
it was kind of an interesting position that I was thrust into at that point, which kind of opened my eyes to the need that a lot of parents have and a lot of young people have, which is, what do we do about this hobby that's here to stay, that
Yeah.
is broad? It's a little different than movies in many ways. As you've dove into many different times, there's so many facets and aspects to it,
Hmm.
especially now.
Yeah.
And what do we do with that? And I think that's something that a lot of people are wondering. What do we do with that?
Yeah. That's such a cool place for parents and even just people in general to be, is that realization that video games are not just for kids anymore, especially how you kind of talked about the different themes and how complex they're getting. Like it's wild to see. Like, I mean, even with Death Stranding, I know I've talked enough about Death Stranding, but I'll talk about it again because it's recent memory. Like, that game has so many layers to it that it's, in some degree, someone tweeted at me earlier today that the themes and the story and stuff that's going on in the game is more interesting than the game itself, like playing it. And I'm like, I kind of agree, because it's really making you think. It's challenging some of your assumptions to a degree. But something I've noticed, and I think this is probably primarily because we cater to a more Christian audience. I mean, if you're not a Christian, you can still listen to the show. It's not going to be an issue. But I think because we pertain to a more Christian audience, we've encountered a lot of, I don't know if a lot is a right word, but we've encountered a good percentage of people within the Christian circles who still think that video games are either a waste of time, they're childish, or X, Y, and Z, the kind of the usual ones we've heard. So with that in mind, what do you think it is, or why do you think people still kind of, push video games out, or don't take them too seriously? Things along that lines. What has that been? What do you think about that? And I guess what has your experience been? Do you still experience people that think that way around you? Not to throw shade at them, but just kind of,
Well, I'll give you some names and addresses first.
Okay, here we go.
Absolutely not. So what you're saying is absolutely true, and I think some of it's because of the complex nature of games themselves. Again, they're not all created equal, so you can
Yeah.
walk up and you can engage with a 10-year-old who's there playing Animal Crossing on the Switch, and
Yeah.
they're spending the afternoon just kind of hanging out. They're catching fish. They're making their little home a little better looking, and just sending maybe some annoying notes to the other villagers, just threatening them slightly, but nothing too intense, right? And then you switch over, and there's someone who's got a current gen game. They've got you name it, the easy ones that everyone picks on. Growing up in the 90s, it was Mortal Kombat,
Yeah.
or Grand Theft Auto, or whatever. Any of these more intense, mature content. I want to say mature themed, because some of them have like mature content. There's nothing mature about the game, and
Yeah.
but you can see that these two things are not easy to compare.
Yeah.
A first person shooter and a puzzle game are not the same thing. And I think that's why it's hard to deal with as a broad category for a lot of adults. And there's a lot of adults who play mobile games, and I see it everywhere now on their phones. They'll just play, some sort of puzzle game or Words with Friends, a Candy Crush type of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And if you ask them if they play video games, let's say no. I don't play video games. And then they pop open their phone and they're updating, the cooldown timer on whatever they're engaged with.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's still very complex, and it has that level of engagement that we see. And there's both the strength and the potential danger of games is their immersion and their ability to
Yeah.
be consuming, and that they can become central to your thought process. And where we see this most extreme is with children. And so if you listen
Mm-hmm.
to a group of 7 to 10 year olds, I have a 10-year-old myself, him and his friends, they're talking about Among Us still. They're talking about
Yeah.
Roblox, but now they went from 9 to 10. So Roblox was cool at 9. At 10, that's kind of, and then their other friends are talking Fortnite, and, oh, well, we don't play Fortnite, because my dad says and so there's these different types of conversations.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes it hard to really get a good grasp on, because it's so varied.
Yeah. It's listening to you describe it and just even think about it. It's almost like a giant ocean with how vast how vast and the different varieties of games that there are. I understand that. Yeah. It's hard to really kind of wade those waters. It's like, as a parent, where do you even start? Because there's so many games that are so different. And I think something that, at least from what I've seen in my time as a youth pastor, parents seem to focus on the mature theme games. But something you mentioned just now, and even in your book as well, is that there's a difference between a mature rated game and a game that actually is mature. And I guess, could you elaborate on kind of what the difference between having an M rated game and a game that actually that is mature, I guess, would be the right way to phrase it.
Well, I think it's good that we have an analog in movies. There's not often that you get movies and games that overlap as much as some try to make them. But in
Mm-hmm.
this case, you've got your ratings for content that you see in movies. And so your R-rated movie got that rating, not because it's brilliant writing or because it's a 17-year-old plot in order to appreciate it. It's
Yeah.
because there's content there that has met the criteria for saying, no, this is not allowed for children, period.
Yeah.
And vice versa, you can find G and PG rated movies that are incredibly mature in their storytelling, their writing, their acting, everything about them. Uh, but there's nothing that is broadly offensive or past a certain limit. And so I think that the video games are the same way, but we can't assume just because it has that high rating, whether it's T for teen or M for mature, or whatever the international ones are. We can't assume that the game itself is going to reflect that same sort of mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something, kind of breaking that down. That's something I've even noticed, is that, when you hear people, or I guess, and the time that I was a youth pastor, you'd have people ask like, oh, well, is Call of Duty actually mature? And I'm like, well, when you look at it, especially the older games, it's kind of more tongue in cheek. It's kind of like, it's more comical action movie, typical stuff. The more recent stuff, specifically the Black Ops line, has definitely gotten some dark themes in terms of Black Ops and those kind of operations and what they're called to do. But then you have something where Grand Theft Auto is more what I would consider probably more juvenile in its maturity, because it's more like that. When I think of that game, I think of like, this would be appeal to junior high kids because this would be funny to them, this would be interesting to them. But something like The Last of Us is like, yeah, don't let any kids play this at all, because it's really dark. And I guess another even current one would be Marvel What If. You have the different
Mhm.
episodes between like Marvel Zombies, which is more comical. It's kind of goofy, a little nightmarish, but you have that juxtaposed with the previous Doctor Strange episode where it's like that gets really deep really
Yeah.
fast and it gets dark too. So there's a pretty good parallel with that. But I guess you being a parent yourself, and with parents that are listening to this that maybe are wondering, how do I determine between the two? What would be some helpful tips that you would share with them in terms of wading those waters and trying to discern what's right for their kid and what isn't?
Yeah, for again, I can tell you my experience, and I got to thank my parents. They were ridiculously strict growing up. Maybe a little too strict. Fun fact: I grew up homeschooled until high school age, and so I
Okay.
had my mom around me 24/7. I had two sisters. My dad was there 2 out of 3 days because he was a firefighter paramedic, and so it was always like mom and dad were always around, and we were super strict. You did chores to earn tokens. They were the original gamifiers. They had
Okay.
gamification of chores. So you would earn tokens, your tokens you'd exchange for your little egg timer, and they'd put the egg
Hmm.
timer, and when the timer was up, the NES went off.
Oh,
And
wow.
and there was no games on Sunday, and it was like half-hour max for any given day. So that was a pretty clamped down limit. Unfortunately, my sons inherited some of that. I'm pretty strict about the time, and my general guideline is if you're a parent, you realize quickly that it's easier to break your own rules and give them a little extra than it is to open it up the floodgates and then try to rein it in when you realize it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So if you are a parent of younger children, start slow. Realize it's always easier to say, you know what, let's do something a little special. I'm going to give you some extra time. But the normal amount of time is still, whatever your limit is, so that
Yeah.
that you don't create this sort of new expectation. And the other thing that's so important is be involved, be present, sit there with them, even if you're not a gamer or even if you don't like the game they're playing because it's just, well, because it's Roblox. Sit with them, be present, engage with it. If you can play with them and it is manageable, do that. And be ready to have conversations. Be ready to have dialogue if it's a game that begins to open up questions because maybe it's overreaching where you're ready to have some conversation. So, just be engaged is my number one
Yeah.
tip there.
That's good. I like that a lot. As a former youth pastor, again, that's something that yeah, I can definitely get behind, and I would definitely want to share that with parents as well. I'm curious because I noticed something there a little bit. Was Roblox a game that you had a hard time sitting through?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It is. And that's, I've got my own reasons for that. I think it's the challenge is my son lives in a household where I have almost every single retro game system going back to the Atari 2600, the
Oh,
Magnavox, a
wow.
Neo Geo AES, Sega Saturn, Dreamcast. I've got a Virtual Boy off camera up here. I've got all
Awesome.
these hardwares, and I'm like, you've got the best games of history, like accessible to you, and you want to go play some user generated using recycled assets. You've got Sans from Undertale swinging the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII. Why? Who are you? Who are you related to, son? So that's my own issues coming out there. Uh,
Yeah.
but do it
Uh,
anyways.
yeah. That's funny. No, I can relate. There's sometimes I can have really good home cooking, but there's some nights I want McDonald's, and I can't explain it. It is what it is. There's something nostalgic about it, but it is what it is. I'm curious. You said that when you were playing games growing up and you're playing at home, you had this rule where you didn't play games on Sundays. what was the particular reason behind that?
Uh, it's the Sabbath. We
Okay,
got it.
fair
We got a
enough.
day. It was Sunday, and you know what? That was a day that we set aside. We didn't work. We didn't play games. We spent time together as a family. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, so that was where
Okay,
we went growing up. We always did Sunday school and church. Every Sunday that was our routine. We'd come back and just as a family spend time together. Nobody off in their own rooms doing their own thing, but it was about
okay,
let's keep our Sundays as a family day and as a day
yeah.
to rest up and not be diving into everything else.
Okay. No, that's very cool. I admire that and respect that a lot. And I think I heard several of our listeners who are Presbyterians just get real excited. Um, so is that something that you've continued currently with your family now, or kind of what has that been like with your faith?
Wow, holding me to task on this one. you know, um,
Just hide this episode from your parents if they listen.
right, right. No, that's not. It's not my parents I have to answer to. I would like to say that we would be better about keeping our Sundays free from other activities like that. I would like that,
Hmm.
but it's something. Here's what I do still do. We still play video games, but by the way, my parents didn't. That was
Oh,
probably one
okay.
of the differences. So us playing
Huh.
games on Sundays as children meant we were separate and we were doing our own thing. Whereas with
Yeah.
my son, we sit down at the Switch, we play Mario Kart together, we play Kirby
Very
Star
cool.
Allies or something like that, or I sit next to him and watch him play Roblox. And so it's something like that where we're together as a family still.
Hmm.
My wife's very involved that way too. She doesn't play games at all. She hates them, but which is ironic. Uh,
Yeah.
but she still plays them, and she'll still sit and do Mario Kart with us and things like that. And so it's still about keeping the family together. For us, it's about making sure we're not off doing our own thing,
Yeah.
but rather we're engaging together in a meaningful way. So that's the goal in our household.
Yeah. No, I love that mindset because that's just it's a good way to, earlier you talked about kind of redeeming your time with your commute and listening to podcasts. That's another good way to redeem your time is to, not only be present with your kids, but just have the whole family there together to have those experiences and things like that. With your faith in, how has that influenced kind of your gaming or maybe even your gaming habits, or has it at all?
I think it affects the choice. I feel there are certain themes that I gravitate towards,
Hmm.
or I look through my own worldview. My worldview lens informs what I walk away. And so there are times that, and I think we as Christians can all do this sometimes, is maybe we look for things, we try to find the truth in there. Because I remember
Yeah.
learning when I was young, the truth is truth, no matter who's speaking it. And so it's very possible to encounter truth in the world, um, even if it doesn't necessarily come from a source that is 100% speaking truth in all ways. And so I think it's
Yeah.
important that we know what it is, we know the truth. And so I find it in games, and I've heard you talk about this too. Whether it's elements of Death Stranding, there's this pro life slant, and what is the implication there? That was something that really was intriguing to me. When we play, I love Castlevania games,
Yeah.
and I like one that a lot of people kind of dismissed, which was the Lords of Shadow. Um,
Thank you. Okay, I'm glad I finally found someone else who also likes that game. It seems like anywhere I look on Twitter or anywhere, Twitter's probably a bad place to look to begin with.
it gets a lot of
It seems like
hate.
people hate it. I don't know
I
why. It's a good
Yeah,
game.
it's a great game, and you get to smack Satan around at the end of it.
Yeah.
Well, Lucifer, so.
Right.
But then when you see elements like that, so for me, I like to see games, especially story driven games now, that have redemptive arcs. For
Yeah.
me, my soul loves this idea of redemption, right?
Hmm.
Redemption is a key tenet to my core of my faith. And so I love to see that redemption of characters that oftentimes, if you look at a lot of modern movies and a lot of modern contemporary stories, it's this dwelling on the brokenness and the
Hmm.
fallenness rather
Yeah.
than the ability for redemption. And so anything that has a redemptive element to it, I love that. That's my
Yeah.
jam right there. I want
Yeah.
to see people make better choices and turn it around and get back on track.
Yeah. I think, and what's cool about you bringing that up is I think a lot of us, especially as Christians, just really resonate with that. Even hearing you bring that up, I'm like, man, I'm thinking about Final Fantasy IV with Cecil and oh man, was Cain, Cecil and Cain, and how they have two different journeys, but they're both on a path to redemption. One of them finds it a different way than the other. And it's just, yeah, it's part of the reason why that game is so good is because of those characters themselves and how they start off doing a really evil, heinous act at the beginning of the game, but then by the end, they're redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
They're forgiven. And Cain had definitely a more rocky path to it because he goes back and forth between being good and evil, but I don't want to ruin it because the pixel remasters are out and people are probably going to play it. Awesome game though, if anyone hasn't played it.
Absolutely.
Final Fantasy IV.
It's a great classic. I think that a lot of the Final Fantasy series has similar themes of redemption.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in 6, there's a lot of redemption that occurs throughout. Even the whole shift, again, not to do spoilers, but there's that midpoint shift, right?
Yeah.
Where there's a literal fall, and then there's this redemptive nature after that. 7 is chock full of it. Even 13, another one that gets lambasted. You've got, you've got Snow, who's all about trying to do it. And what's interesting is his attempt to redemption is self-driven, but he continuously fails at it. And that's an interesting thing to think about too. Is the redemption isn't something that is a result of an individual's effort there, but it doesn't stop him from trying.
Yeah. Oh man, you got me thinking about, man, we need to do episodes on those games now. And I'm sure some of our longtime listeners are like, Logan, don't take us back to the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages is when like I feel like I need to explain Dark Ages a little bit for some of our new listeners. Is that there was a period on the show where I played, I think it was like there was Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Played through 6 Final Fantasy games in the course of like 3 months. And so that's all I talked about on the show. It was, I was burnt out by the time I was done. I hated 10, even though I probably shouldn't hate 10 because of it. But it was unfortunately at the tail end of everything. But yeah, no. So as we kind of start to land the plane, something I wanted to kind of ask real quick here, something I noticed in your book is that you said in the epilogue that you mentioned art being a passion of yours growing up and you'd stay up late drawing. Is this something that you still find time to do?
I wish I could say that was the case. And here's my thoughts on that matter. First of all, I do a little bit of graphic art. I dabble in that. I do a lot of design. I still find ways to infuse it in my day job and my professional work. So there's measures of it that I still engage with. But as far as what I used to do is just sit down with a blank page and a pencil and just go for it. It's been a long time. Okay. However, in those moments that I've gone back to that, those have been some of the most refreshing, reflective, peaceful moments that I've had. And so, for anyone listening, if you've got one of those hobbies that you used to do that you've allowed to take a back burner, might be worth putting some time on your calendar to set some time aside and revisit that, because there was something there inside that was connecting with a spark that is worth reconnecting with, especially with everything that I think a lot of us have been going through this past year and a half. It's worth going back to some of that joy that we find and we see glimpses of it. I love C.S. Lewis's take on joy. He had the book Surprised by Joy, but just it's this glimpse, this longing, this little taste of eternity, of what heaven may be. And this idea that for just a moment we can experience a slice of that. And it's usually found in these areas of giftedness and talent, but also of interest. And it's there for a reason. I think it's worth engaging with.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the reason why I asked is because I used to draw a lot growing up too, and then I got away from it when I got into college because it was all digital graphic art stuff. So I stopped drawing, and I've been trying to get back into it lately. I saw this trend on TikTok where someone will pull out 2 Pictionary cards and then pick 2 of the categories and then draw something based off that. And I've been trying to do that more here recently, just because it's a good exercise to kind of like get the creative juices flowing. And so I already drew something that was like a mixture between a rabbit and an elephant. And then I drew a clock on a skateboard because those were some cards I pulled, and I've got some other ones I need to work on too. So
It
Cool.
sounds
Fun
fun.
little activity. Yeah, it is a lot of fun. It's pretty interesting to see what kind of goofy creations you can make from it, but it's a good activity. Well, Jon, we're getting close on time here, man. I just want to real quick thank you for carving out time to really be on the show, kind of share with us some different ways that games can teach us to persevere in not only just business, but life as well. And dear listeners, like I said before, giving away a couple copies of the book as well. So all you have to do to reach out to that is that if you're a patron and you're listening to this before the episode hits public feeds, just type in the comment on Patreon. First person in the comments gets a copy of the book. And then if you're listening on public feeds, hit us up on Twitter, and then we'll get you set up through that as well. Because it's a really good book. I really enjoyed it as well. Do you have an idea? Well, you kind of said that you're still working on the draft of the second book, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just follow you on Twitter. Which, by the way, Jon,
Yeah.
how can people follow you and keep up to date with you?
Boy, lately my social media has been a little bit of a dry thing. I've been just otherwise focused, but I am on Twitter from time to time. It's at CT, as in classically trained, CT_blog.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's super awkward. But,
No worries.
so I'm there, and I've got links there. That's probably the place to go if you're interested in seeing anything else. Or there's classicallytrained.net, which is the other site that I'll eventually provide some updates to. There's a lot of backlog material there.
Yeah.
I've got some video game quotes, so quotes that I found inspirational. I did kind of like inspirational poster images with the text of the quote over top, so you can check that out. And I share some of my thoughts there, and I will definitely tell more about my book as it's nearing completion, which will be titled "If Video Games Have Taught Me Anything."
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Well, dear listeners, like I said, all the links to everything will be in the show notes. And before we let you go, this is kind of a staple of the show, the Recos. So, Jon, what is something that people should check out apart from your content, your book, your website, and everything else?
Absolutely. Card games are lovely. My family loves one called Sushi Go.
Sushi Go. I
It
feel
is
like
a
I've heard of this
great little
one.
game. It's fun. You can pick it up. It's great for all ages. It's one of those games that you can play with kids that are like 7 or 8, and the adults will still love it. And there's not a
Oh,
lot of
okay.
those. So having something you can pick up and play is a lot of fun. Sushi Go is great. I would say pick up if you like science fiction. Coming up in October this year, I'm not sure when this episode's dropping, Dune is being made into a feature-length film. If you want to engage with a classic sci-fi book, Dune is a great read if you're going to read. If you want to be a writer, Frank Herbert, who's the author, he will make you feel incredibly inadequate when you read his writing because he's just has a way with words that is humbling. And then finally, I would throw another one in there. A friend of mine, Joe Lalonde, is writing a book called Real Leadership. And that's all about the leadership lessons you can learn from movies.
Oh, very
So
cool.
it's real is spelled like a
So
movie
it's
reel, Reeel.
REEL. I love that. There's another podcast that we network with called Popcorn Theology. They'd probably get a real big kick out of that. So I'll have to let them know about that. That's awesome. Cool. Well, as far as my recos, again, definitely check out Jon's book. Of course, like I said, some people will be given copies from listening to this episode. My other reco is because I am teaching robotics now at my school, and robots have been a big interest of mine ever since Terminator and Robotech and all that. I've been reading a book called Robopocalypse that I thought was just about robots. But it's about robots that are apparently also zombies, and they reanimate people and control them. So I'm like, this just combined two of my favorite things, zombies and robots, into one thing. This is awesome. So it's been a very interesting read. I highly recommend it. I believe the author's name is Daniel W. Hill. Don't quote me on that though, but it'll be in your show notes as well. It's been an absolutely fun read. But again, Jon, thank you for coming on this episode, man. I hope our listeners got a lot out of this. I'm sure, actually, I know they did. And so I hope they check out your book and your other content as well. But yeah, dear listeners, as well, if you would like to support what we do here at TRG, you can support us on patreon.com/thereformedgamers. Support as low as $1 a month gets you early uncut access to all of our episodes, behind the scenes, and more. So if you want more content, Patreon is the way to do it financially. But if you can't support us financially, understand it. Maybe you want to connect with us a different way, get involved with the TRG community, A lot of ways you can do it. You can go to our website, thereformedgamers.com, has links to just about anything and everything. YouTube, Discord, Facebook group, Facebook page, Twitter, all that stuff. It's all there, but it's also all in your show notes as well. I would definitely love to get to know you if you're a brand new listener, or if you've been listening for a long time now. We'd love to get you connected. And you can be like Jon and join the Discord server and hang out and have a good time over there, and maybe grow your backlog a little bit from all the game recommendations too. So, like I said, tread carefully when you join the Facebook, just the TRG community as a whole. But again, Jon, thank you for coming on the show, man. Greatly appreciate it. And for you, dear listeners, as always, until next time, be a deer, keep it locked here. We'll see you in the next episode.